I'm going to discuss with you something about the Air Force where I spent many years. We're going to discuss the Air Force, the air power of India vis-a-vis our enemies, that is Pakistan and China. I will say this, that there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends in politics, and you never know that India and China may become friends at some stage, like say Russia and China. They had a big border dispute earlier. But with Pakistan, one can't say the same thing because that is an emotional and religious divide left by the scars of partition in 1947. So it's a different situation with Pakistan. And Pakistan, I think, will remain our main adversary, though it will never be able to match the Indian power. Now that's easier said than done. But what is the position at the moment? Let's look at the Pakistan Air Force, because there's a news now that Pakistan is going to get the J-20, the Chengdu, the fifth generation Chinese fighter. I believe they're going to get 40 planes, and that's a game changer because India doesn't have anything in comparison to these planes. And the nearest we have got is the Rafale, which is actually a 4.5 generation fighter and doesn't match the Chengdu. I don't know about the Chengdu, how good it is, because we have only had the reports, and probably if I get a chance to fly it, I'll be able to judge what the Chengdu can do. And there's a possibility that there's more hype than reality, because so far the Chinese goods, whatever they have produced, are inferior to the Russian and American planes and weapons. So that is also a fact to be kept borne in mind. For example, the Chinese tank has been found floundering even in the tank competitions, the biathlon which they have in Russia, where the Indians have done very well. Well, gentlemen, the Chinese Air Force is pretty big, and Pakistan also has a very big Air Force for its size. It's got about 700 aircraft of all types, and now they're going to get these 40 Chengdu fighters, fifth generation fighters, and they would be a game changer if they are any good. China doesn't mind giving them to Pakistan, which they feel is their ally. At the same time, Pakistan doesn't mind letting its people face hunger and other problems so long as they have the weapons, because they've got a fixed mindset, that you've got to match India. Why should you match India? I thought just like Australia and New Zealand are good friends, India and Pakistan should have been good friends, but it doesn't happen that way. So in contrast, what has India got? India has got about 1,200 aircraft in all. That includes transports and everything, like the Pakistanis have got 700. So India is almost double the size. But then remember, India is 5 times the size of Pakistan. And India has to face the combined forces of China and Pakistan and now even Bangladesh. At the moment, Bangladesh is a big zero. It can't fight for anything nuts. And it will remain a zero because it's hemmed in on all sides by the Indians. And the Indian army can pick and choose its battleground anywhere in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh won't know. Recently there was a comment, by a learned person in India, that it took India 13 days to liberate Bangladesh and create Bangladesh from East Pakistan, but to destroy it, it will require only 3 days. So Bangladesh at the moment is not a threat at all, other than some pinpricks here and there. But the main danger would be from Pakistan, which got a very formidable air force, 700 planes. India's got 1,200. And as per my reports going on, the Chinese have got nearly 2,000 first-line aircraft. And the overall strength should be around 3,000. So that's a very big air force. But most of it is obsolete type aircraft. I think they are not a match to the generation of planes which the Americans have. Now, what is India's options to face the fifth generation fighter, that is the Chengdu, both now going to be rolled out by China and Pakistan? Actually, there are only 3 options. for India has got. No other country has got these planes. Russia has got the Su-57, and the Americans have got the F-35 and the F-22 Raptor. Now the Raptor has been around for more than a decade, I think even more than that, as a very, very successful and skillful fighter. I can't say the same about the F-35, which is very, very sophisticated. But at the same time, there have been a lot of operational problems with the plane, but in terms of sheer efficacy, I think it would be the best fighter in the world at the moment. The question is, will the Americans agree to give the Raptor or the F-35 to India? That is the question. The Americans are pretty choosy about what they do, and there was a recent comment by the Russians that you better be careful of the American planes which you buy, because they got this self-destruction switch which can be activated sitting back in the Pentagon or Miami or somewhere, and these planes in actual combat could be blown off from America itself. I don't know how far to believe it, but there is a possibility, because you can see that the Americans did not even give the engine, which was contracted with General Electric for the Indian-made fighter, the Tejas. The Tejas was a good plane, but definitely not a Mach 5 fifth generation fighter at all. And now that it doesn't have the engine coming in from America, I think it's a done deal. So sometimes I wonder why India should waste millions of dollars in making the airframe and the engine when you can't make the engine. And why can't India make the engine if the Chinese can make it? Now that's the point which we must address. One thing is that we had a series of leaders here like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Shastri and others who didn't believe in power politics. They didn't believe that India would ever be attacked by anybody. So they gave the defense a low priority. No research was done, nothing. In fact, the Indians did make a plane, I think, way back in the late 50s when Dr. Kurt Tank, one of the German aircraft designers who were earlier with Focke-Wulf, came to India at the end of the war. He was teaching in IIT Madras, and then finally Nehru asked him to join the team at HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics, and they produced the HF-24, that is the Hindustan fighter. It was a good plane. Its body frame was very good, but Indians, again, the same bogie, didn't have the engine. They fitted an underpowered Rolls-Royce engine, and this plane was never used extensively by the Air Force because it was subsonic in an era where the supersonic was the need of the hour. That is why India went in for the MiG-21. And this is just a bit of history. Now, as it stands, the Chinese Air Force has, however, one constraint. Because if they have to battle with India, they have to operate from Tibet, which is at a height of about 10 to 12,000 feet. Now, when an aircraft flies at that height, its thrust and payload has to be greatly reduced because of the rarefied atmosphere. And hence, whether you're flying the J-35 or the J-7 or anything like that, it's not going to be honky-dory for the Chinese, because they will be countering or facing Indian planes which are going to take off from the planes with full payload and will have high performance there. So that is the handicap the Chinese have. But at the same time, numbers can have a telling result on the game of war. So India is not at the moment favorably placed, in my opinion, because when you are facing almost say 3,700 or aircraft around that and you have 1,200, I don't think that's going to work out. But one thing is very clear, that China doesn't have only India to look after. They got to look after the area which is being occupied by the 7th Fleet, that is the Pacific, Eastern Pacific, the China Sea. And there are some enemies there, like the Philippines and Japan and South Korea. So China is also under threat. They can't put all their aircraft against India. That means they would leave their main flank open for attack. So both sides have got some problems. The question arises, who is the better side? I would say the Pakistani pilots are good. My experience with the Pakistani air defense system is that their air defense was very good when they faced India even in the 71 war. In West Pakistan, of course, East Pakistan didn't have anything at all. Comparatively, they just had one squadron of F-86 Sabre jets, and these were, after the first day of battle, they were rendered inoperable, and the pilots went back to Pakistan via Rangoon. And so the Pakistan army was bereft of air cover in the eastern region. As far as the western region is concerned, I've already told you they put in a very good fight and they had a good air defense system. But their offensive systems were pretty poor. But that was because they didn't have the right type of aircraft to move into the hinterland of India. But now if they have the Chengdu, the Chinese fifth generation fighter, it will give them that much spunk and they'll be able to penetrate into India. This plane can fly low, as per its specifications. How far it's accessible has to be seen, as I told you. But it can fly low, evade radar, and attack most of the sites in India. So the Pakistani Air Force, at the moment, cockahoo a little ahead of India, but everything is not honky-dory even for the Pakistan Air Force. Because if you remember in the 71 war, the Bengalis, who were the part of the ground crew of the Pakistan Air Force, really put tools down, and a lot of aircraft of the Pakistan Air Force couldn't take off. So Pakistan again has an internal danger which they're facing, and that is the TTK, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is the offshoot of the Taliban of Afghanistan. And then we have the Baluch Liberation Army fighting. And it's not going to be easy for the Pakistanis. But at the same time, having an air force which is the biggest in the Muslim world would be something that is they can boast about. And as far as India is concerned, our strength is too less. India needs to have a force of at least about 2,000 aircraft. But then India is always weighing budget and with security. Now with security, there's no budget. And things have been compounded by a cap on the army being kept at 1.2 million. I don't see why. Because you need more soldiers, more divisions, more weaponry to face China. Because you're going to battle China in Tibet, and to think that it's not going to take place is a fallacy. It is going to take place at some stage, and China will really play hell into India at that time. They are having a detente now, but it's a tactical one. The Chinese can change colors like the cavalry at any time. So coming down to India, we need some strike course to strike deep into Tibet. Now Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, is not very far from the Indian border of Sikkim. And that is the route the Indian force can follow. And this is the route which General Young husband followed in 1903-1904, the British general who led the Sikh troops, into Tibet, and they reached Lhasa, and the Dalai Lama ran away at that time. So, gentlemen, the situation is, I would say, not very good for the Indians, but at the same time there is spirit and strength. Our training is very good. Our pilots are one of the best in the world. I remember in the early 60s, some of the pilots who went to America for fighter training, and they had a gradation, and the first 5 positions all were backed by Indian pilots. So after eating dal and rasam, our pilots were better than the Americans. So the Americans, who rely more on simulated flying, while the Indians do actual flying, and there's very less of simulated flying in India. So we'll have to see what happens in an actual battle. But definitely India is a little on the back foot. And now we don't have very many aircraft which we can go, and China is breathing fire. At some stage it will breathe fire. And the Russians have offered the Su-57. Now I have my doubts about the Su-57 because a number of them have been shot down in Ukraine, I believe. And they are not invincible. They claim it to be a 5th generation fighter, but I don't really know if it's as good as the F-35. My guess is that it is not as good as the F-35. So if India has to go in for an aircraft, it's at a great cost. It has to be the F-35. The Raptor, as I told you, has been around too long. and it would be becoming obsolete in another 10 years' time. So India needs a plane which will last for a more longer period, and that plane we have got is the F-35. Another thing which India needs is a strike bomber, and the Russians have offered India the Tu-160. Now this is the supersonic bomber. You don't expect the Americans to give their stealth bomber to India. I don't think so they'll do that. But the Russians have offered this Tu-160, which is a fantastic plane, and you can hit any part of the world with that plane. So if you can have one squadron of that plane here from Russia, but that's going to cost a lot of money, and maintenance requires courage also, when the Indian government wants to go in for it and have a defensive mindset. Because the defensive mindset can be seen from the fact that even the battle against Bangladesh has not been launched. Though the Indians think tank has said that they can finish Bangladesh in 3 days, they should have done it the day Hasina had left the country. They didn't do it. And that was the time when India had complete control over the air, complete everything, and the Americans could not have reacted. And now the Americans will not allow, of course, Bangladesh to be attacked. But even now, India has got a troubled relationship with America, so we don't know what's going to happen. Because if they didn't supply us those engines for the Tejas, I wonder if they're going to give you the F-35's whole hawk. They put so many restrictions on it. The only plane which the Indians now have got a choice is the Su-57. I don't know whether the Indians would like to go in for that. But the fact remains that Indian aviation industry is very, very poorly placed. And who's responsible for it? It's your guess as good as mine. The Congress party? They let the country down. In 47, India was having an aircraft factory here in Bangalore. We were making cars in Calcutta. We had the locomotive factories in Chittaranjan, India, and the steel plant. India was having a steel plant in Jamshedpur. While the Chinese, not even a bicycle was being made there. And now where is China and where is India? Who's responsible for this gap? Well, it's for the public to judge. And you all know it. I don't have to keep repeating here. We had people like Nehru and Gandhi, and I don't think we need to be too proud about these people, They made India into a laggard in Asia. And then the Modi is trying to level best, but you can't change the colors of a crow overnight. Okay, gentlemen, I think I've closed now. I've given you an assessment of the Air Force of both Ireland, and it's been a very sad occurrence indeed that India at some stage will have to fight a war, and that war has to be decisive. It could be the Armageddon, like what's said in the Bible. Let's be careful. I'm all for it. I think then the Indian nation has to rise up. Forget about its differences. Rahul Gandhi in particular has to be taught a lesson. I hope they do it. I'll close now, and I'll say goodbye to you all. In the meanwhile, if you like my channel, please subscribe to it and share it with your friends. I will say goodbye, God bless, and Jai Hind.